So Emily, you're going to start with a little excerpt from your book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. I was trying to think of the context that's important here. So I'm reading, and this is in part one. And I think the most important thing to note is that in the first pages of the book, Eleanor runs into a lovely young woman, and there's something there. And then honestly, she kind of forgets about it. And then fast forward to a few weeks later. After the lecture, she shrugged on her coat, arms into sleeves, facing the front of the room. That was when she saw Elevator Girl in the first row, standing, talking to Franny. Where Eleanor had remembered only the broad outlines of her long, dark hair, and that she was beautiful, now she saw more. Her wide and sparkling smile, her deep brown eyes, the slope and roundness of her breasts through her long-sleeved t-shirt. The way she looked when she laughed, eyes closed in pleasure and her head thrown back. Eleanor liked everything about her. With a racing heart, she advanced to the front row. Her stomach flipped like an eager, crisp pancake. "Hi," she greeted Franny, but her eyes darted to Elevator Girl. "How are you?" She sucked in her gut, smiling widely in what was hopefully an attractive way. Franny nodded enthusiastically. "I'm good, Eleanor. We're going to do dinner. Do you?" "Yes." Her eyes flitted again to Elevator Girl. Eleanor gave a warm hello, and the girl said hello back without recognition. She wilted a little to not have been remembered, but she rallied, blood thrumming in her veins. It felt like fate to see her again, their paths crossing here and with someone in common. She floated to dinner, no longer cold and instead feeling only summer inside, down to her bones. At the dining hall, she sat across from Elevator Girl, butterflies blooming in her stomach. "It's that weird thing," Eleanor volleyed across the table, "where I don't know your name, but now it feels like too late to ask, but Leena," Elevator Girl replied, with a mouth full of bright teeth and the slightest slip of a laugh. Not Elevator Girl anymore. Leena, the most lovely name she had ever heard. Leena still didn't appear to recognize her, but she was smiling and friendly, talking about her pre-med studies. Eleanor was lost in thought, imagining Leena in scrubs with a stethoscope around her neck, when she heard Leena say to Franny, "Jennifer Beals is fucking hot." She looked excited, her cheeks lifting and her eyes sparkling. She was so cute. "Fucking hot," Eleanor echoed, jumping back into the conversation, which had to be about the L word. They parted at the end of the meal, Franny heading to one end of campus and Eleanor and Leena peeling off to the other, alone together. It was dark, the black sky dotted with glowing, burning streetlights, guiding them up Comm Ave and back to their dorm. She felt the cold air rushing past her cheeks and smelled car exhaust, hyper aware of her footsteps on the sidewalk, of the person at her side, and it all made her feel like one huge exposed nerve. Without any idea of what to say next, she opened her mouth and let her rambling mind take over. "So what was Franny like in high school?" Like she even cared. It was just something to say that wasn't, "Can I kiss you?" She rubbed her lip with her thumb. "We were friends of friends. I didn't know her that well. She was like she is now, nice and kind of like an adult." Eleanor snickered. "She's very serious. When we were dating..." Leena stopped in her tracks, at the part of the journey where Comm Ave felt more industrial, traffic rushing past and headlights blaring. "No way, really?" Leena smiled, sounding skeptical. Eleanor brushed a nervous hand down the back of her neck. She needed a haircut. "Yeah, but it didn't work out." Leena shook her head and resumed walking, Eleanor following. "I can't imagine Franny dating anyone. Is that mean?" Eleanor shook her head vigorously. "No. Well, maybe." Leena laughed then, and it lit Eleanor up inside, fireworks spreading and rising inside her chest. She put a fine point on what she was trying to say. "She's a good person, but we didn't have chemistry. Franny never made her feel like this, raw and nervous and blooming all at once." "So where are you from?" "Not that. I mean, where did you grow up?" Leena asked. Eleanor cast a look toward the girl at her side. For the whole of her life, "Where are you from?" usually meant, "Why do you look like that? Why are you not more Asian or white? Where are your parents from so I can easily judge who I think you are?" But Leena had clarified her question. Maybe she had heard a similar query her whole life, too. "Fremont in the Bay Area? Like you're San Francisco?" Leena brightened. "Really? That's so cool. I've always wanted to go to San Francisco." Eleanor smiled at that, swiping into the building past the RA on duty. They boarded the elevator, and the sense memory of their first meeting washed over her as she pressed the 7 button, and Leena pressed 9, their fingers almost brushing against each other. The feeling of destiny topped up her confidence, like maybe this was something to pursue if only she gave it a little boost. As they neared her floor, she turned to Leena. Hey, we should get together sometime to watch the L Word with Franny. She added that last part as padding to save her heart if it came to it. Leena nodded. That sounds fun. The elevator doors opened and the devastation of leaving washed in. She wasn't ready to go, not when they were only getting started. Give me your email, we can make a plan. Eleanor produced a pen and blocked the elevator with her body, rolling up her coat sleeve and offering her arm as a notepad. She hadn't considered how it would feel for Leena to hold her limb, a touch that almost singed, that sent Eleanor into territories of desire. The elevator made a panicked sound, and Leena released her arm with the long string of a school email address now inked on her skin. She leaped out of the door's path. See ya. Leena looked down at the floor, then back at Eleanor, lips parted as if she had one more thing to say, as the elevator closed and she disappeared. Eleanor couldn't sleep, a buzz from the night. She sat at her desk in that cold and hard wooden chair and looked Leena up online, but there were too many Leena Shahs on the planet. How could that be when there was such a perfect one? All others should be sued for trademark infringement. She rubbed the skin on her inner forearm where Leena had left her mark. This is an email typing. Hey, Leena, it's Eleanor, Franny's friend. I had such a fun night. I'm going to have people over to watch L Word on Sunday. You should join us. She pressed send before thinking any more about it and closed her eyes. When she read the said message, she gritted her teeth. Forced cheer and casualness, but it was out and gone. She ran through scenarios in her mind. Leena would read her email, think she was a weirdo, and pretend they never met when they inevitably ran into each other. Or Leena would read her email. They'd fall in love, the end. In her inbox the next morning, alongside an assignment reminder from the professor of her queer Jewish culture class and a syllabus change from Professor Post, was a reply from Leena Shah. Her adrenaline spiked, nervous to know. With one eye open and fingers crossed, she clicked. Hey, I'd love to hang out, but I'll be at a family wedding this weekend. What about Thursday? There's a documentary on street harassment playing at the Union. Eleanor grinned at the screen and barely took a breath before formulating her reply. Sounds great. Not street harassment itself, but the documentary and hanging out Thursday night. I'll see you soon. And just like that, she had a fucking date with Leena Shah, the best of all Leena Shahs. At least she hoped it was a date. She also had feminist practices that started in 7 minutes, so off to class she raced.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Emily, I love your book. As you know, I am your biggest fan. It's really fun to read. It's filled with surprises. It's so well written. And I think it's really, as far as I know, the only contemporary novel of 2 young Asian women in love. Is that true?
I think it is true. I think, I did a sort of a little bit of homework, and I think it sort of is. I mean, other stories sort of focus, I think, maybe more holistically. So it's family, it's, other sort of complicating factors. And not that this book is certainly about family, but I think focusing on that relationship, I think it is sort of singular. And I've started to read sort of other more sort of like, not romance novels, but maybe sort of bordering on that, and with queer women. And again, I think it's sort of to have 2 queer Asian women together at the focus. I think it, from what I can tell, it's the one.
Well, I mean, you're really offering something to a lot of different communities right now, because you're giving the lesbian readers or people who enjoy reading lesbian fiction an Asian lesbian novel that's very, very contemporary, but you're also offering Asian American literature, a modern lesbian novel, and you're offering Jewish American literature, a biracial Jewish lesbian novel. So, I mean, in the old days, a lesbian novel, only lesbians read them, but I'm hoping that other, people who are interested much more broadly will come to this work. So I guess my first question for you is, where did you get the guts to do something like this?
That's a great question. Maybe I saw my parents here. Hi, Mom and Dad. I think it's some combination of like where I'm positioned in history, of being enough of an age where sort of I think getting just these little morsels, like today for fun. I took a few minutes. I was watching just a little bit of this romantic comedy called Saving Face, about 2 Chinese American women who meet and fall in love and the complications that ensue. And so I think, I had that, and there's a couple other things. So sort of, I think I could see enough of, I could feel comfortable knowing that sort of to write this wasn't something that wouldn't be accepted, that was dangerous, anything like that. I think I sort of knew that there were those touch points out there, while also sort of feeling like there just wasn't enough and wanting to see more. And I think it's been so wonderful to see the roundup. So I'm included in, you know, like September LGBTQ authors, and there's so many of us, and it's so exciting. I think it's more than I sort of thought. So again, I think that speaks to sort of the comfort piece of, you know, knowing I wouldn't be, knowing it just wouldn't sort of go out into the void, right? Sort of knowing that there would be hopefully someone interested. That's where the guts came.
There could be a lot of people interested. So the story is Eleanor, who comes from a Japanese Jewish family that's very assimilated. Her mother sometimes is cooler than she is, right? And then you have Leena, who comes from a very traditional Indian family. So what you're doing is, although it's two Asian women, they're coming from completely different cultural backgrounds. And did you feel comfortable taking that on?
I guess, like, short answer is sometimes, not always. I think, you know, there's always a little voice here saying, why are you writing that? That's not good. So obviously I think there's some of that, but I think I tried to pull from what I knew, I think, without sort of wanting to tell my story. I mean, of course there's me in here undeniably, and people in my life, but I think, you know, I tried to sort of draw some different pieces. So my wife's family is Jewish. I am Japanese, though not Japanese Americans. I think that was kind of an area of a lot of research. And I grew up around Indian American women. And so I think that there was sort of a comfort there for me in telling that story. But of course, I think with all the things I just described, those identities, I mean, none of them are sort of mine and owned and something that's sort of deep to the core. So I think I felt as comfortable as I could and tried to do my research and tried to have conversations to feel like it wouldn't be taking a wrong turn, a wrong leap anywhere.
Well, you start the story where the two girls meet in women's studies. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the piece you just read, you know, their idea of a hot date is going to see a documentary on street harassment. So you're sort of making fun of this kind of earnest, young, coming into feminism. But you did study at Rutgers in women's studies. So, I mean, was that sort of a model for this context?
Yeah, definitely. I also think this was, you know, I think the reason why I started there was the right, you know, which again I deviated from that, but I think that sort of was what felt comfortable to me was that experience. I also think I haven't really read that. I'm thinking a little bit about like Wendy Wasserstein, like a little bit of that out there in the world, but I guess wanting it to be both. You're right. There's a little bit of poking fun at it, but also kind of taking it seriously, because I think the women and the people that I knew who were feminists or women's studies majors who sort of cared about this, you know, cared deeply and wanted to affect change. And I think I see my friends now out in the world sort of doing that in different ways. I'm out in the world doing that. And so it is like to me, a perfect study for life. I don't know that it is an immediately applicable major to sort of land you that great job, whatever that means, but was such important training for me as a person, as a feminist, as a woman, as a queer person. So much community came from that. I learned so much. So I think, again, yeah, it was a little sort of, that's what I know. But yes, of course, there is like some, you know, there's the white girl with her blonde dreadlocks. I couldn't help but put that in too.
Well, your career is also very interesting, and I think readers should get some inspiration from you, because you did not get an MFA. You are not one of those people who went to Yale and your classmate's mother got you an agent or anything like that. You came up entirely through the community. We met at Queer Art Mentorship. Your agent, Robert Ginsler, is on the board of Lambda Literary Foundation. Your publisher is the absolutely coolest, greatest independent publisher in the United States, the Feminist Press. So your entire career has happened through the community and through the grassroots. And I really want people to take that in, you know, that there are ways to move forward in this world as an artist without having to do all of those networking, touchstone things out there. So when did you first feel that you were going to be a writer?
There were a lot of like basement plays when I was 6. I think that was a thing. And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a playwright. I spent 1 year at BU, 1 semester in their drama program, and I sort of talked myself out of it. I think some sort of imposter syndrome at work, or who knows what factors, but I think it's always been something I've wanted. And I think the narrative I've created, whether it's true or not, but I think, I tell myself that I left theater school, but I think, but always sort of in the back of my mind, I wanted to be creative. So I've had a whole nonprofit career. I've done creative nonfiction, but I think really what I wanted to be doing was this all along. So I think to return to it has been amazing. And I think just on the MFA thing, I'll say it's so true. I think sometimes though I do, what those, as to your point, what those networks get you, right? What you essentially pay for. Obviously, for some people, it's incredibly beneficial, but, I think our working together, I've said this to you before, but if that was, for me, that felt like my MFA program. I learned how to write a book from you. And I think that, to your point, that community approach is so amazing because I think we have so much to learn from each other. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, incredibly valuable. Absolutely.
Well, just to let people know, Queer Art Mentorship is a free program where you apply to work with queer artists in your field. And if they think they can help you, they take you on and work together, and it's all free. I want to get back to the playwriting thing because I'm also a playwright. Do you think the fact that there was so little Asian queer theater available at that time, that may have kept you from really feeling that you could have a future in the theater?
That is such a great point that I have never considered before, but I think that's entirely possible. I also think too, I think I sort of just felt, well, yeah, I mean, I guess considering me, I think something I remember from high school is back in the day of wanting to play Maria in West Side Story, which sort of is not for me. But I feel like that was like a goal at that point. Because in terms of sort of like parts for people of color, there just, weren't any. I think our drama department, I think just, yeah, we looked to the canon, right? There was a lot of Shakespeare, there was a lot of that, but I think, I had to get older to sort of see who else is out there. But yeah, I think it was in part sort of like, I guess maybe, yeah, I think that's so interesting. Sarah, you've provided me a revelation, truly. I think you're right. And also I think to sort of see sort of like queer wise, I think what was out there and sort of not finding it, I think is a part of it. But yeah, definitely. I especially when I think about when I wanted to be an actor, when I was in high school and sort of that first sort of brush into college, I think, feeling like I didn't know where I would fit. I would imagine that must have played some role in it, absolutely.
Well, I mean, writing a play is what people say and do, and novels are what people say and do and feel and think, and also what the light is like and what their costumes are like and what the weather's like and all of that. So how did you make that transition from that interiority to that kind of external, internal world of fiction writing?
I feel like I had a lot to learn. I feel like you and I often would go to the text, and I feel like you would say, "But what are they feeling?" Because I think for me, where I feel most comfortable, I think, is sort of in it's sort of dialogue and sort of light structure. And I think kind of I'm working on a new book, and I think that's sort of what I have now. I'll have conversations sort of marked out, and I have okay, they're going to be here, and this is sort of generally happening. It's an outline, but I think. Going to those details is something I think that I've had to learn how to do. So I think right now, a lot of it is sort of right now and previously, but just learning how to sort of like record things. So I'm sort of always taking notes right now of, oh, the air feels a certain way. And I sort of try to like lock that in and save that for later. The way the light looks in the sky, because I think it doesn't always come to me right away. But I think one tool that I use a lot is, I would just not be a good sci-fi writer at all. Speculative fiction, I adore it, but it's not for me because a world building exercise, I think, is not for me. I love to sort of look at like, what did that building look like in 2010? What did the awning look like? What color was it? I feel like I like going to sort of the specifics of something real and tangible. And then for me, I can go there and get into the details and think about how someone would have felt walking down the street in 2015 in the East Village. So I think that's sort of, I go to something that's almost journalistic, I think. And then I can kind of go from there, but I think I sort of need that underpinning, creativity wise. That's sort of where I start.
Okay, so before I continue with my questions, I just want to tell everyone out there that if you have a question or a comment for Emily, just put it in the chat box and we want to hear from you, and you can start right now. So what was the first time when you first started reading lesbian literature and when you first started reading Asian American or Japanese literature? Do you remember how you got into that? And it's sad because they don't come together really until your work, but yeah. I mean, there were obviously earlier people who were like Kitty Sway and people like that, but not in the contemporary moment.
There's one book that I think, in sort of the the whole the marketing world of book writing, I think there's Bright Lines, and I'm totally blanking on her name. Tanwi Islam, I believe is her name. But anyway, to that point, yes, I think there's sort of not a lot. I don't know. I'm trying to think of that. You're right. I do think it's sort of a separate thing. I don't know. I'm thinking about maybe college or something like that. I remember in high school picking up Farewell to Manzanar, so sort of like about the internment camp. And the experience there of someone who actually went through it. That sort of is kind of maybe the first. Is that even possible? I think that's true. And then I think on the queer side, I don't know, I'm thinking about Price of Salt and sort of those books. But I don't know, I feel like actually with writing this book, I think I sort of started trying to go to those touch points that I might have missed. So you recommended Aquamarine by Carol Ann Shah, which I immediately grabbed and totally enjoyed. And that was something I think maybe people don't necessarily know about that book. I feel like I'm always telling people about that book. They don't know about it, but that's a great one. But yeah, I would say probably it's been like drips and drabs, but I think in writing the book, I was obviously sort of thinking, well, first of all, like what's come before, right? I don't want to sort of rewrite something that's already happened, but just sort of wanting to see sort of like, yeah, my foremothers, my forefathers, where have they been? How did they sort of characterize this identity, this experience?
Well, Price of Salt is just like they're always having stingers, they're like, it's so waspy and they're always having these cocktails and they're drunk off their ass. I don't know how much they can drink that much, but it was like really a novel of oppression. It's a profound novel of oppression. And of course, Smith was very depressed, kind of phenomenally evil. Ultimately, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read her diaries, but they're quite evil. Yes, but anyway, but I love that book as well. And Carol Ann Shaw's book, Aquamarine, it plays with the idea of that your homosexuality is in a sense a coincidence. And that's what makes it an early novel, because it's, now there's an assumption of a sort of innateness. Right, but she was still theorizing it as a choice. And that's what makes the structure of that book. That's why I love that book, but it's so from another time. What are you reading? Oh, go ahead. I
mean, I will say just about the book, I hear what you're saying. And I think I also sort of, maybe because I'm always picking up on queer undertones, it's my unpaid job I love to do. I don't know, I felt like there was a queerness in every part, even the ones that weren't overt. But I do hear what you're saying, that it's sort of, whether someone acts is not an immutable thing, I guess. Yeah. So just kind of, sort of interesting.
Okay, we have a question here from Nick. Hey, Emily, I love your book. I'm wondering, what was your favorite or most challenging time period to write in? And he says 2004, 2010, or 2017.
That's a great question. 2004 just took a lot of mental stretching, I think, to go back that far. But Sarah, I think the first time we met was the night of the 2016 election. We met sort of like right right before it in that time. I remember that very clearly. And so I was writing the book in that time, right after the election. I think I was really kind of digging into to some of the book. And so I think the ways in which 2004 looks like 2016, and of course doesn't as well, obviously way worse. But so I think that kind of, I was sort of in the right frame of mind, I think, for that part of it, and to sort of feel frustrated and, upset. I mean, I think the book started, I started writing it in 2015. And so I think that was kind of a different era, a different moment. What a time that was. And so I think sort of the book actually had a very different tone at the end. Now it's very different, I think, because it's placed in 2017, purposefully so. In some ways that is sort of a coming around, although again, way worse, but what it's like to sort of just always sort of feel like you're looking over your shoulder. But so maybe sort of, but to the 2004-ness of it, I think just took some research, what existed, what didn't, things, cell phones, things like that, sort of what models were out there. I mean, I didn't want to make too much of a meal of it, but, there's a flip phone because there would have been. So just trying to sort of be cognizant of those sorts of things. And again, sort of like what was culturally being talked about and what wasn't. I think there was a lot of that.
Well, like the book that you're writing now, do you have a title for it?
It's like very, very working title. 9 Months That Made Us. That's what I'm calling it.
Okay. So are you having characters in masks who are like afraid that Trump is going to end the world? And are you doing that sort of thing?
Great question. Yeah, I will say, I feel like I haven't thought about that element of it. I originally I was going to have it take place earlier, and I decided to shift gears. And in some ways, I need the world and life to keep playing out. May life keep playing out. But so actually, part of it I think will actually take place during the pandemic that we're in right this second. I think sort of a part of it will sort of take place in March of 2020. Who knows how this will actually be, sort of when we can reflect on this year. Again, may we be able to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think yes, I think there will probably be that. I mean, I can't imagine writing a novel that isn't about queer people. So my novel, the next one, will be about queer people, and it's just sort of a different take. It's I think kind of more deeply about family and less about love, though that certainly plays a part. But it will. I am actually trying to decide sort of if it's in flashback or if those are sort of dedicated sections. But ideally, I think it will sort of like traverse time as well.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be edited by the marvelous Feminist Press and what that process was like for you?
Yes, I would love to talk about that. This is my first book. I can't compare it with anything else, but it's been so wonderful and affirming to work with Feminist Press. I think there were, I thought about this a lot because I think this is sort of a very unfortunately classic thing that happens where, for example, if you're writing in a foreign language, it's italicized and there's an othering of it. Nobody ever asked me to do that. There was none of that. And if anything, it was just sort of, it's not even that the audience doesn't sort of need to understand the translation, but they need to understand the gist of the or there's no translation. It's just sort of is what it is in the book. There's Japanese, there's Gujarati, there's Farsi, but it is just sort of presented as is, as people talk to each other. The way that sort of second generation children respond in English to their parents who are speaking in another language. So all of that I think was sort of treated so well, and just I felt like I didn't have to do any educating on queerness or or on the experience of women, or there's a trans character in the book, and again, sort of no questions. I think sort of the folks that I worked with sort of understood everything, and I think that was an amazing thing. And then there were obviously other things that came up, but sort of a different nature, and so I think it felt comfortable. And I think it's sort of, it sort of feels like such a direct line from, my women's studies undergraduate career sort of to Feminist Press. I've known about them for years. So
Want
it
to
was.
shout out the name of your editor?
Yes, yes. Jisoo Kim worked with a ton, and Jisoo has been amazing. Even today, answering my lots of questions that I have. They've been wonderful. Everyone's been wonderful there.
Great. Let's see. Okay, so from Colleen O'Hara. Genre questions. What was it like to transition from nonfiction work to fiction? Do you see borders of genre bending or blurring in your work?
Oh, so interesting. Yeah, you know, like I said, also my toddler's in the other room doing things with buttons. Is that loud? Can you hear that? Is it okay? Can you hear me okay?
Just like, just go for it.
Great. Like I said, I think there's something about my interest in specifics and accuracy, which is doesn't have to be a conceit of fiction, but I think for me, I like to sort of say, well, the D train wasn't running at that time, so it couldn't have been the D train. It's got to be something else. There were very little times where I wanted to deviate from that, and that was something I think Feminist Press was wonderful about too, because knowing that's what I was doing was then saying like, oh, I don't know, Uber wasn't available then, don't do it. So stuff like that I think was really great to have that kind of support. So, but yeah, I think I start from that of kind of wanting to have something grounded, in real life. And I also think there's something there too. The book is a lot about the L word. There's a lot of references to the L word because, in 2004, like that's what we were watching and that's what we were talking about and loving it and hating certain things. And it just kind of is, what I've gathered is sort of that has very much resonated with other queer women readers. Because I think again, it comes from a real place.
It's a cultural touchstone.
Yeah,
Jenny Schechter. Okay, Eric Platt. Hi, Emily and Sarah. Congratulations on the novel. I wanted to know what it was like pitching queer literature. Were publishers receptive? Tell the truth.
Hi, Eric. That's my brother-in-law. Great question. I think they were very generally receptive. When my agent was sort of saying, hey, do you want to see this? Everybody said yes. I don't think there was anyone who said no. But when I think it ended up with them, wasn't a fit for a lot of, people had sort of different reasons why that was true for them, that it wasn't a fit. And yeah, some people were nuanced, some people weren't. And I guess it is a curiosity that I have, what they saw and what they didn't see and what they could relate to and couldn't relate to, right? So like, yeah, were you obsessed with the L word in 2004 because it's the only kind of media you had that reflected your life? Or do you have an understanding of what the women's studies experience was, so I think there's some of those things where I think, especially right out the gate, right, sort of at the beginning of the book, that's what it is. And so I think for my hunch, I guess, is that some folks just couldn't, it just didn't land for them.
I mean, having suffered through the submission experience with you, I mean, the paucity of Asian editors and who were open to queer content, so many of those young white women in publishing, really are quite narrow in terms of what they can understand or relate to. It was pretty shocking, actually. But you ended up in a good place.
And that's the thing, I think, because again, I think there wasn't a lot of translation needed. I think it was clear what I was trying to do and where I was coming from. So I think you're right. I think I ended up in the right place. That feels true to me.
And then Eric says, do you think the appetite for queer literature has changed since you started writing in 2015? I'd like to answer that. Is that okay?
Please.
There are so many young queer women of color who are writing now. I mean, it's remarkable. Nicole Dennis-Benn, Melissa Febos, Catherine Hernandez, Miriam Gerba. They're just, it's a revolution. Now, so we haven't seen any of those books hitting the New York Times bestseller list or being optioned for movies, but it's a growing field, and with people who are young and going to have big careers. So I think that things have gotten better since 2015.
Yeah.
Yuli Restrepo. Emily, I'm wondering about the importance of seeing both Eleanor and Leena's families in such a detailed way in the book. Why did you want to make the family such a significant part And how does this inform the decisions Eleanor and Leena make about their own relationship? No spoilers.
No spoilers. Yeah, I guess I didn't know how to tell this story by not talking about their families. I think again, I'm not Jewish, but how do I say this carefully? To watch my wife's family, I think like there is such a closeness there. If one of them decided to write a memoir, or some fictionalized version of their life, they couldn't not sort of bring in family. And I think I've observed that with other friends too. And I think in the same frame of Japanese culture, I think sort of it's not necessarily like it doesn't have to, or I guess there is an undeniable family right behind you, I guess. And what that looks like is so different. I think in some cases I watch friends, I watch other people in my life, the family just sort of like is on your back. I don't know that is something that I know to be true, but there's just, they couldn't not be there. I think that's what it felt like to me. And I think especially, again, in the Indian folks in my life, I think again, sort of whether they like it or not, family is sort of close, has opinions, wants to be involved. So they just had to be there, I guess. Yeah. And then there was the second part of that question I'm blanking on.
No, that's good. This is from Maddie Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations. I'm so happy Eleanor and Leena's story is out in the world. You talked about working on the book during the 2016 election. Although you touched a bit on this earlier, could you talk a bit more about coming up against these major political social shifts and whether those required you to alter the course of your characters' lives?
That's a great question. I don't know if the course of life was so different. I guess that this is a good moment to talk about how privileged they are. These are like middle to upper middle class women who I think aren't necessarily going to be affected in huge ways. And obviously sort of like people of color are affected, queer people are affected. So maybe it's not a sort of like a completely untouched life. I think what I saw in my own editing after the election and placing that last section in 2017 was my own projection, I think, of a certain sense of despair, a certain sense of sadness, I think. So I think that sort of is a bit of a fog over it. But it is, but it's also kind of not. It's not about that. I would say it's a character in the background, but I don't think it sort of is central. But definitely think it changed. And I think also, I was mentioning this before, but the 2004 bit, I think sort of actually changed perhaps a little bit more. I think there's a section Eleanor laments on she could have done more. And I think that's a feeling I had in November of 2016. And I think other people did as well. So I think it's interesting. I mean, it's right. So sort of like 2015, Emily wrote it, but 2020, Emily also had a part in it. Definitely think that just there were for sure tonal shifts, I think, affected by a rethinking of being an American, honestly.
Right. I only have 2 more questions for you. So readers, feel free to put your questions in the chat. The first thing is, what are you reading now, or what have you been reading recently that you really have been grappling with or enjoyed?
I'm maybe, I forget, I'm like maybe, I don't know, a third of a way through Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler, and I'm just delighted by it. It sort of is fun and fascinating and funny, and I'm just enjoying it so much. That was lovely. I'm trying to think what else I've been. I would say kind of recently, that's the thing I've enjoyed most. I also read Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I'm totally blanking on her name, but just such a, again, just like a fun read. That has been really great. I don't know if I'm grappling with that. I would say that sort of happened to me in an extremely lovely way. I think, there's a lot of like 11 to 11:30 at night reading. So sort of like, that was a great thing to be kind of taking in. That was something that was a really fun read recently.
Right, because you have a brand new baby, right? So
yeah, still pretty brand new. Yeah. And so, yeah, I would love more reading time. Actually, I'm very excited. I'm going to be taking a sabbatical from work. You know, my big goal is to work on the next book, but also I just want to read a lot. I have an extremely long list, so I'm looking forward to digging into that.
and what was your child's first book?
Great question. I think it might have been The Feelings book by Todd Parr, which is not all feelings, but is largely feelings about, you know, sometimes I'm cranky. I think that's like an important lesson to learn, to be able to identify feelings and what to do with them. But I have to say, I think, you know, I have this background as library science, information science, and so I take children's literature very seriously, and you know, and sort of like the work of the We Need Diverse Books campaigns. I think that's something that I really took into account. You know, what are the stories being told? What do the characters look like? You know, wanting a lot of obviously wanting queer books in her life. That felt really important to have all of that in play. To have it from the get-go, very important.
Sweta Shukla says, "Hi Emily, congrats! I'm so happy for you. What are your top 5 favorite books?"
Five is a lot. I don't know, but I think kind of top of mind for me is Americana. I think that to me is. We're in a different league. It's an incredible book, but I sort of love that it's, you know, a love story, but is grounded in something real about identity. I thought it was just fascinating and beautiful, and I was so addicted to it. That is, gosh, top 5. I don't know. I used to have a memory before having a child, but I would say that's like, maybe that's one of my top ones I enjoy very much. It's not, maybe, I don't know, is it in top 5? I don't know, but Sarah, you recommended Age of Innocence to me, and I loved it. I was writing about it for a piece on LitHub that just came out today, and reflecting on that book, and just like, at first I sort of didn't know what to make of your recommendation, but it's masterful. And I think kind of once I hit my stride in it, I would stay up late and read it.
I think it's a great book for writers at Edith
Yes.
Wharton, because every single thing that she introduces, she lands. All of her tropes land. Like, you see a flower and you don't know why it's there, and then it lands. You know, she has some, okay, let's see what we have here. Oh, Angie McCaffrey. Love the book. Curious to hear how you manage writing this book while working, going through a pregnancy and having a baby.
My kiddo's name is not in this book. No dedication, no acknowledgments. She wasn't helpful. But I will say the most important thing is that the book was mostly done when she arrived, because I don't know how I would have otherwise, especially, you know, with the full-time job and all of that. So I think that was really the crucial part, was her not being here yet. But, you know, I think now, I think it's just kind of trying to take advantage of every spare moment that I can get. So she goes down for a nap and I'm writing, even if I'm tired, you know, nights, mornings, when I can hang it, when I can figure that out. I think that has been sort of really crucial.
Okay, so here's my final question. Where did you get that fantastic suit?
Thank you for asking. Can you see the one? So this is from Bindle and Keep, and so they're based in Brooklyn, and they anyone can get a suit from them, but they really cater to a queer and trans community, and so they're extremely affirming and very they're awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emily, and congratulations.
Thank you, Sarah.
And thank you, Maris.
Yeah, thank you, Maris.
Thank you. Congratulations, Emily. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to this wonderful audience. I'm going to remind you one more time to buy the book, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.